Before I start this video, I just want to let you know that this is a special for the 150th anniversary at Cedar Point. Cedar Point has one incredible history and many ups and downs in the process of creating such a world-class park. So without further ado, let's dive deep into Cedar Point's history. What is up, enthusiasts? It is Cedar Flags here, and welcome back to my channel. A lot on this channel, I like to talk about Cedar Point, the roller coaster capital of the world in Sandusky, Ohio. On this channel, I usually dive deep into the future of most amusement parks, including Cedar Point, but today we are going to go back to the past for Cedar Point to answer this question: how did Cedar Point get so popular? If you don't know already, Cedar Point has held many records over the years, including now. Cedar Point holds the largest collection of rides in a single park, as well as most roller coasters over 200 feet. There are a lot of reasons why this park is the best, if not one of the best parks on Earth. So let's get into the reasons why this park is where it is today. So the reason I even make this video in the first place is because that Cedar Point has had many attempts at the park closing, and there are many factors that go in Cedar Point's way of being a popular amusement park. First of all, it's not in a major city. It is in Sandusky, Ohio, which is a decent sized town, but nowhere near some of its competitors. The park is also very old. Most parks from the 1800s didn't survive. In fact, it's the second oldest park in the United States, only behind lake compounds. Third reason is that there were multiple attempts at closing Cedar Point in general, and the park has survived, get this, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and many more crises in America's history. So now we're going to get into the reasons why Cedar Point is still here and how it is rocking fans to this day. To do this, we're going to have to dive deep down into Cedar Point's history 150 years ago to learn about how Cedar Point made it so far and became such a big and massive amusement park that has truly changed the amusement park industry. The first reason I want to get into is the park's real location. Not the location on the map of Ohio, but the actual location itself. Cedar Point is located on a peninsula in Sandusky Bay, completely surrounded by the beautiful Lake Erie. It also has a beach on the eastern side and is surrounded by Lake Erie on all 4 sides, including a sound which is located in between Cedar Point and the mainland. It is completely surrounded by water, and that truly gives this area a beautiful advantage to start something new. And we're going to get into that in reason number 2. Cedar Point truly adapted with the times early on. If you don't know, Cedar Point opened in 1870 as a public beach, and it opened up with, of course, the beach, a few locker rooms and changing rooms, as well as some dance halls, and in the latter half of the 1800s, it actually became super popular to the locals in Sandusky. A very crucial point in the park's history was when they decided to add their first roller coaster, which was actually one of the first roller coasters installed in the entire country. It was one of Lamarcus Thompson's Switchback Railways, which famously first appeared at Coney Island in New York. Shortly after, Cedar Point got on the train and decided to add one of their own. And Cedar Point actually became one of the first modern American amusement parks. In the late 1800s, the park was in danger of closing for the first time, but new ownership would change the park forever. Without one man, the park would close back in the late 1800s, but a young businessman from Indiana known as George Arthur Beckley decided to move from Indiana to Ohio to start a railroad company, but instead decided to work on Cedar Point after he fell in love with the property in the early 1900s. He started the Cedar Point Pleasure Company, and his main goal was to make Cedar Point the Coney Island of the Midwest. Beckley expanded Cedar Point until his death in 1931 and added a total of 6 roller coasters and many other flat rides. They also added other attractions such as the massive Hotel Breakers in the famous Coliseum, which would majorly benefit them in the near future. The 1930s came both the Great Depression and Beckley's unfortunate passing, which took a major toll on the park. The park was threatened to close for a second time, but then new owners came up with a great idea. Which brings us to reason number 5, the big band era. In the 1930s and 40s, the big bands were the biggest bands around. And Cedar Point, very low on money like every other corporation in the United States, quit expanding roller coasters and decided to turn the Coliseum into a concert hall. Many big bands during the era played there at the time, providing cheap entertainment to guests, and the big band era kept the park alive. The park was doing pretty good until the 1940s, when they realized they needed to expand more, but they couldn't. To get more money in desperation, they decided to close more coasters until Cedar Point was left with absolutely no roller coasters at all. In this time, the park was truly the closest to closing that it has ever been. There were actually concepts from the city of Sandusky that came up with a new residential complex to replace Cedar Point. It didn't help either that we were right in the middle of a world war, and most of our country's resources and research were going towards this war. A lot less people were going outside because they didn't have the money to entertain themselves, and Cedar Point truly was in a troubled place. But at the end of World War II brings us to number 6. The 6th reason on this list is more rapid expansion. The economy after World War II was truly booming, and Cedar Point in the 1950s was inspired off of Disneyland. Disney's first theme park in Southern California truly inspired many amusement parks across the country and yet the world, and Cedar Point was one of those parks. Just like Coney Island, in the 1950s, Cedar Point was inspired to become the Disneyland of the Midwest, and they pretty much succeeded. They remodeled the entire park, removing all of their older attractions and completely starting over, and in a few short years, Cedar Point rose to their former glory as a world-class amusement park. Some of their older attractions actually still stand today, including the Sky Ride, the Midway Carousel, and Blue Streak, their oldest roller coaster, added in 1964. From then on, truly brings us to number 7, innovative attractions. From Blue Streak to Corkscrew to Magnum to Steel Vengeance, Cedar Point has been installing innovative and unique attractions since that remodelation in the 1950s. The park kept expanding and truly became the roller coaster capital of the world in no time. For example, their first truly major record-breaking coaster was Corkscrew, which made international headlines to have the first roller coaster to go upside down 3 times. Shortly after that was Gemini, which was shortly lived as the tallest and fastest roller coaster on Earth. They soon took back that record with Magnum XL 200, and then the tallest inverted coaster with Raptor, the tallest stand-up coaster with Mantis. Today, Cedar Point stands as one of the most impressive amusement parks in the world. From the history, you could tell that Cedar Point has been through many ups and downs, and today Cedar Point still stands strong and survives as one of the strongest competitors for the best amusement park in the world. In the Golden Ticket Awards, it was number 1 for a while until 2014, when Europa Park took over, but Cedar Point is still fighting for that number 1 spot at a very close second, and is still impressing guests to this day. I really hope you enjoyed this video. What is your favorite era of Cedar Point, as well as your favorite ride at Cedar Point? And what ride at Cedar Point do you think made the biggest historical impact on the park? This is Cedar Flags. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys later.